Oval chain rings, well, do they give you an advantage? And how do they actually work, when they squash these actual chain rings down? What are they trying to achieve? And are they the right choice for you? Let's do that intro and let's get into it. Well, I've been scratching around the internet and it seems like oval-shaped chain rings, there's not a lot of information on how they actually work. There's a lot of information on the anecdotal evidence of how people feel they are to ride, but there's actually no actual explanation to why they've actually squashed these rings in the first place and what are they trying to achieve. So let's actually discuss that first and see what the outcome is. So then we can actually have an evaluation of whether they're actually good for you and me. Now, actually looking at the rings, they're actually like they're squashed, and they're not actually egg-shaped. They're more like an oval, like a rugby football. And they actually have a flatter, narrower section one way, and they actually have a longer section the other way. Now, these actually can be adjusted, especially rotor. They actually have a number of holes and you can actually turn the rings around to actually set it the way you want. But the majority of them are set, so the actual long part is actually set on the actual point where you're actually having the most power for your stroke, and the slimmer side is set onto the part where you actually have the less power going for your stroke. Now, these rings generally have the actual elongated part on the actual power part of the stroke and the actual slimmest part on the actual weakest part of your stroke. Now, what they're trying to achieve here is the actual leverage. So when you're actually on the longest part of the ring, the actual diameter of your foot that's traveling in a circle like this is that the actual leverage effect is reduced. So you're actually getting less leverage effect through the power part of your stroke. But when you get into the weak or low part of your stroke, then the actual ring is narrower, so you're actually getting more leverage effect. So what they're trying to do is pinch a bit of power from the power part of your pedal stroke and give it to the weakest part of your pedal stroke, trying to even out the pedal stroke's performance. Now, if we look here, we can actually see the actual diameter of our foot that's traveling around in the pedal. And you can actually see, if we actually measure that pedal point to the actual ring at the most elongated point, then the actual distance is reduced in comparison to when you actually measure the distance from the thinnest part of the ring to the actual foot diameter. Now, the longer this distance is, the more leverage effect you're going to get to the point where the chain is actually in contact with the chainring. So, as you can imagine, a longer distance is going to give you more leverage. And this has actually been set at the point where you actually have the weakest part of your power stroke. So a lot of people believe that these chain rings in some way give you more power, and that's actually not the purpose or the actual point of actually designing these rings. What they're actually trying to do is just even out your pedal stroke and give you a much more uniform power delivery through the whole stroke. Now, a lot of people argue that they may give you some advantages and may not give you some advantage, and the reason why they say this is because your bike, the crank and the weight and everything has inertia, so it's actually spinning anyway. So that small difference in time where you're actually changing the amount of power actually going into the actual transmission at those different points really is insignificant. And there's been a number of scientific studies, and some say, yeah, they do actually give you some benefits in certain circumstances, and some others say, no, they don't make any difference. But the real thing is you need to try them yourself, and if you feel like you're getting a smoother stroke and they work for you, or they reduce knee pain or hip pain or some sort of other ailment that you're carrying, then they're actually a good thing. But they're more of a cycling aid, that's what I would call them, rather than a performance gain. So in conclusion, we've actually looked at how they work and what their actual purpose is. Now, the purpose is, as we've discussed before, is to actually even out your pedal stroke. So your power delivery is becoming not so like a peanut, but the peanut part where it's actually less is actually more, and the part where the actual peanut is more elongated is becoming more rounder. So that's actually the purpose of these chain rings. It's not to actually deliver more power. Now, you might say, yeah, this is a great idea, and if that's going to work, that's great. But the biggest disadvantage to these chain rings is that because they're out of shape, and the more oval you actually make them, then you actually have a problem with the derailleur, because the derailleur needs to be set to the actual longest part of the ring, which means when you actually go to the smallest part of the ring, the derailleur sits a lot further away from the actual chain ring. Now, this has actually been a controversial thing with these rings, because the actual front shifter can be compromised, and setting up the front derailleur can be a bit tricky to get them to work properly. And I've actually used them as well, and I actually went away from them because of this reason. Now, front derailleurs have actually improved over the years, so you know, they may actually be worth a try, and the Absolute Black actually argue that they have different chain lifts on the inside of the ring which actually perform better. But I haven't actually tried that product, so I don't know. But I actually do like the actual smaller rings that Absolute Black offer, but I run Campagnolo and I've actually contacted them. They don't make rings for Campagnolo. So really that's it, guys. If you've got a Shimano group set, it's not really an expensive price upgrade to try them, so they're worth a try. But remember, all they're doing is to try and smooth out your pedal stroke. They're not going to give you more power or anything like that. That's not their purpose. So guys, that's where I'm going to leave it. And if you've got any comments, chuck them down below. And I'll see you next vid, guys. Cheers.